Hey there, YouTube. I'm Ikitsu. This is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking about the Sularkan Tyrant, the command ship for the Visari Alliance. Normally I don't try to chase algorithm sort of stuff here, but I'm talking about all the ships anyway, so I figured I might as well talk about the command ships a little bit since it's a little bit more appropriate now that they've just come out. Not something I normally do, but it made sense to do it this time just because I was going to do it anyway. Anyhow, the Sularkan Tyrant is the new command ship for the Visari Alliance, like I said there, and it's a pretty powerful ship that's designed, I think, around killing lighter vessels. Let's take a look at the statistics here. So, durability of 600, which is the standard for the new class of command ship. There, it's got 6,630 shield points, it's got 3,120 armor points, and 10,180 hull points. Pretty sort of good amounts of stats across the board as far as that goes. A little bit of a skew towards hull points. Antimatter is 450. It's got 3 squadrons at base, and it scales up to 8 at maximum level. And for its armaments, it's got 12 heavy wave cannons with 12 damage per second each, so it does a gross of damage with 300 pierce. A gross is 144. It's got 6 heavy beams for 10 damage per second each for 600, or sorry, 60, not 600, at 500 pierce. And then it's got 12-point defense pulse guns at 4.5 damage per second for a total of 49 damage per second. All these numbers are adjusted upwards to the amount that you would get when you get this thing, because it's literally impossible to get a Sularkan Tyrant without increasing your damage per second on all your weapons by about 6% there, or exactly 6%. So for hidden statistics, we're looking at a 90 for armor strength, which is pretty good, and then a maximum speed of 600, which is fine for this class of ship as well. So the Sularkan Tyrant does not have the best pierce on its weapons there. It might look good with the 6 heavy beams, doing 60 pierce damage, but when we compare it to the other command class vessels out there, the Sularkan Tyrant is definitely skewed more towards fighting the lighter ships out there. Discounting the PD guns, most of the command class capital ships in the game have got somewhere in the vicinity of around 200 damage per second, which this one also does. And then they usually have some PD gun damage on top of that. But the Sularkan Tyrant has almost all of its damage loaded into something that's got 300 pierce, which makes it so that it's very, very good for killing those sort of lower quality ships there, but its overall damage is much more poor than something like the Oblivia, which is capable of doing about 200 damage per second, but 155 of that is 500 or better pierce. So if you're to duel the two of them with just their guns, the Oblivia blows the Sularkan Tyrant like way out of the water, and it's not even close. So the guns on this thing are actually a little bit poor, in my opinion. However, it's really, really nice that they've made it so that you've got a Visari vessel that is hyper-focused on a single weapon type, because normally Visari capital ships are divided between a bunch of different types of weapons, and that makes it so that it's harder to upgrade them, and it also makes it so that you can't really use the wave modulator because it's just not useful, because you're only doing, say, a third of your damage in wave damage, or you're only doing a third of your damage in beams on a capital ship there. This one, the 60 beam damage is still enough that you may want to get the beam upgrades, but you absolutely want to get the wave modulator on the ship. Just so much of your damage potential is locked behind waves that getting that actually increases your damage by a huge amount. Now, the weapon mounts on this particular ship are in janky spots. So they've got this sort of like 3-prong design here, which is kind of interesting. And apparently the ship is more of a classic Visari design, like from the ye olde days. But you can see that like their weapons are sort of like located on these towers here, or on these prongs. You can see that there's like the beams here at the edge of these prongs here. The damage for this ship is very spread out across multiple different spots. You can also see some like minor guns down here that are sort of on the rear, facing the rear only. It's got its weapons spread sort of all around. And while the weapons can sort of turn to hit targets pretty effectively, this ship is actually kind of designed to fire its guns in all directions, which is not normally something you really, really want to do, but it actually suits this ship pretty okay, so long as you know what you're doing with it. But again, you're going to not do as well into a capital ship duel, or especially a command ship or a Titan duel with the Sularkan Tyrant compared to virtually any of the other command ships that are out there. All of them are going to be able to do like better single target damage than this ship is capable of. So what is this really, really good at? Well, its ship's weapons are capable of spreading its damage out to a wide variety of sort of light or medium targets like corvettes, cruisers, or frigates. It's going to be able to deal its damage against those pretty effectively by sort of flying to the midst of them. However, by itself, the guns, since their damage per second is not any higher than the damage on, say, the Oblivia or any of the other ships out there, I don't think that that's really what makes this special. Its abilities are kind of where this thing shines here. So the first one is Nano Culling. This has a cooldown of 45 seconds, which scales down to 30, and it has an antimatter cost of 30, scaling up to 60 at maximum level. But you're pretty much never going to max level Nano Culling because you cap out at level 10, and this caps out at level 5. So if you were to cap out Nano Culling, you'd have 5 levels of Nano Culling, and then you'd have like a little bit of Terrorize, a little bit of Recursive Regeneration, then 2 levels of Subversion Grid, because their ultimate has 2 levels as well. Which gives you this sort of weird position where you'd only have 3 points to put into Terrorize or Recursive Regeneration, which you could do. Like, you could absolutely make that build, but I don't think that this is the best choice for this particular craft here. Now, this thing has a radius of 9,000, which is very, very good. And what this does is it does 18 damage per second, which scales up to 30 damage per second, if I recall correctly, with 420 Pierce, which is a pretty good area effect damage ability, especially one, the duration also scales upwards, especially one that's basically capable of getting to a pretty high uptime. So you're capable of hitting, like, up to cruisers and dealing a good amount of damage to them. But the more important thing is once that target's hull is damaged and it's below 81%, it scales up to 96, I believe, percent. So when you've taken just a little bit of damage to your hull, basically, the damage rate increases to 90, and it scales upwards to, I think, 120 or something like it. It scales upwards to something. I can't remember what the exact damage per second is, but it's pretty ridiculously high, with 420 Pierce. So if you are able to knock a little bit of hull points off of whatever it is you're firing at, the Nano Culling is going to like just strip away the remaining hit points very, very, very quickly. So I think the reason that the guns on the Sularkan are pretty sensible, actually, is that you just fly this into the middle of a bunch of enemy cruisers, a bunch of enemy frigates, a bunch of enemy corvettes, and its guns are going to like peg a bunch of different targets because they're all targeting different ships. And you're not overkilling something. You're not firing like 2 volleys into something and it explodes. You're causing big damage to 3 frigates, and then the Nano Culling finishes like all 3 of those targets off, or makes it so that like you can finish them off in one more volley. It's a sort of synergistic effect of like doing a weaker but still good amount of damage to multiple different targets all at once there, and then making it so that they suddenly get like huge damage from the Nano Culling. So I think that that's really what this is for. It's also just capable of dealing a good amount of damage to lighter craft in general. It's going to wear down and destroy a whole bunch of Guard of Flak frigates pretty effectively and pretty easily, even if nothing else is going on. It's going to make it so that you can finish off lighter ships pretty easily just with any other ships in your fleet. So pretty powerful effect. I think that this is probably the one that you're going to often use with the ship if you're using it in what I think is its main role. The next one is Terrorize. This is the one that lets you sort of actually fight other capital ships, because the way that your guns are arranged, you're really not at any sort of position where you can just outduel an enemy command ship or something like that, or even some capitals out there could probably outpunch this thing. But Terrorize basically is a ability that's got a 60-second cooldown, also scales down to 30, has a 30,000 range, which is really long, and an antimatter cost of 42 that scales up to 72. So it does get more expensive to cast as you go. It has a radius of 1,200, which is a really small radius, as you can see there. The circle's tiny for that, but it does affect multiple ships, so if you can get a cluster of enemy support ships, that's actually ideal there. And it has a duration of 42 seconds, which I believe scales up to 72 or something like that. And what it does is it increases the ability antimatter cost for that ship, again, scaling a little bit poorly. I think that this goes up to 36% at total at level 5. But more importantly, it deals hull damage per ability used. This one scales up to 270 with 600 Pierce. 270 damage every time you cast an ability. Mind you, you're never going to get this to level 5, but that amount of damage taken every time you cast a spell, and it's like full Pierce, so even a command ship takes that full damage, is not actually that scary at the end of the day. But losing a whole bunch of ability antimatter because the cost increased, that can actually be pretty scary. Now, if it is a ship that really spams out abilities there, and is something that's a little bit slim on antimatter, then this can be really, really scary. If you've got a Scarantra in particular, like casting this on it when it's not paying attention, it's got the armor nanites on autocast, you could actually have it like blow itself up pretty quickly because the only restricting factor there is that it's going to run out of antimatter super, super quickly. But that Scarantra is just going to keep casting Armor Patch every 12 seconds, dealing 270 damage straight to its hull. This is damage straight to your hull, by the way, not to your shields, not to your armor. So you can blow up and still have full armor, full shields. You can't actually blow up. What would end up happening is you'd end up in crippled hull, and then you keep bouncing back and forth between having crippled hull or not. But this is a fantastic sort of a thing to use on a Scarantra. In that sort of sense there. So I think that you're probably not going to level this to full though, so you're not going to get that full potential out of it, but this is sort of how you deal with a capital ship that's forcing you into a duel there, or another command ship. I still think you're at a disadvantage compared to a lot of those other ships out there, but this is what sort of keeps you in the game to a certain extent there against those kinds of ships, making them stay a little bit more honest. I do think that Terrorize, unfortunately, is a little bit of a weak ability, but if you manage to capture an entire clump of Dominus Subjugators, this could be really funny in that particular instance. But their cast ability isn't like so fast that they're going to actually really care. And what's going to happen is they're going to all be like taking 270 damage if you max this out, and they're going to lose a bunch of antimatter, whatever. But you've lost all your antimatter, so you're useless for the rest of the fight because you're never going to be able to use Terrorize on them ever again. And they're going to keep just nailing you with an antimatter cost. They're just going to strip away your antimatter for the rest of the game. So I don't think that works perfectly against the things that would be using those really scary abilities that you'd see in a big clump. Maybe if you managed to get a clump of Hoshikos or Iconis Guardians, it would be really, really strong into that. But yeah, even there. One of the nice things, though, in particular about getting Iconis Guardians is you can capture them into a loop where they're going to try and heal the damage from this, because they do actually take more damage from healing themselves than they do heal. So that's something to keep in mind there. Next ability is the Recursive Regeneration. And the reason that you're probably going to actually level all three of these abilities instead of just one is Recursive Regeneration. This is a very, very powerful ability, giving you up to 3 stacks, and each of those stacks is giving you a shield restore rate of 30 damage per second, which I believe scales up to 60 at maximum level, which you're never going to get to maximum level. The duration also scales up to 60 seconds, which doesn't really matter that much here. So the way you get stacks for this is you cast one of your other spells, and it could be Subversion Grid, it could be Terrorize, it could be Nano Culling. Any of those gives you a stack of Recursive Regeneration, and it makes it so that you just heal a ton of shields per second. And that sort of ability to heal a lot of shields per second helps if you're running straight into the middle of the enemy and you're using Nano Culling. In that particular instance, yeah, this is very, very important for you, for your survivability there. The problem is, since it generates stacks based on casting, you kind of want to actually have multiple different abilities to keep those stacks up effectively. So if you've got like just Nano Culling, it's going to actually be fine, but you're going to ramp up to 3 stacks a lot slower than if you've got Nano Culling and Terrorize, which lets you sort of stack up pretty fast and lets you maintain those stacks pretty effectively. So I think that you could go like Recursive Regeneration and just Nano Culling. I think that works perfectly fine. But I think that you ramp up really, really fast if you got both of these abilities there. The fact that it only maxes out at 3 stacks also means that it's not really that bad to just go Nano Culling. You'll still get it in like a minute, where you cast it at second 0, second 30, and at second 90 or 60. Basically, you've got all 3 stacks in like a minute. It's not that bad. So I think that this is an okay ability under all circumstances, just keeping you alive, because the amount of shield points that you're getting back is kind of silly. I do think that, though, that the other abilities are a little bit more impactful in a lot of ways, because a lot of the time this thing can survive just fine. And if it's got down to its armor or something like that, I think that you can also just heal it with Scarantra or something like that, because its very large armor pool means that you'd be getting back 1,000 armor points per cast. That's absolutely huge. So for its last ability here, you got Subversion Grid. It's got a cooldown of 2 minutes. It has 156 antimatter cost, and I believe that it scales up at level 2, because there's 2 levels of the ultimate for this thing, to something like 300 antimatter cost. I can't remember exactly. This is a channeled ability, which means that your ship is stationary during the entire channel period. But it has duration of 90 seconds, and what it has here is a couple different sort of values here. So First is the final value charge time. This is how long it takes for it to ramp from the minimum effect to the maximum effect. And then it's got a whole ton of values underneath that. What we can sort of summarize here is that it hits the maximum ability range of enemy ships there. It affects their weapon range, it affects their ability cooldown, and it affects their weapon reload. So this is a humongous and very devastating debuff on every enemy ship that's in the sort of gravity well. There are tools that people have access to now that can disrupt this. So it's not as guaranteed of a win as you would otherwise expect it to be. But if you don't have access to the things that disrupt this, then you could be in a lot of trouble. Subversion Grid at second level doubles all these bonuses, which can mean, for example, that you've got a plus 96% to your weapon reload time, making it so that weapons fire at like literally half the rate that they normally would. And plus 96% to the ability cooldown, meaning that you cast your abilities half as often, also really bad. The ability range and ability and weapon range might matter in some instances, but I think they're a little bit less important than the other ones. But especially if you've got a good solid defensive position, Subversion Grid could be very, very strong for its ability to nerf weapon ranges, pulling people in towards more defensive turrets that they might otherwise be outranging. Subversion Grid, I think, is probably one of the strongest channeled abilities that I've seen. It affects everything in that star system, so if you've got the ability to use this, it can be very difficult to actually negate it because it can be very far away from the enemy fleet. Although if you're too far away, the enemy fleet might just choose to disengage. And like I said, this ship also does want to be like right into the middle of the enemy for its other abilities. So if you're only using it for a Subversion Grid, you're missing out on a lot of what makes this ship strong. So mind you, if you're using Subversion Grid, you're not using those other abilities because you're channeling. So there is that. Yeah, I think that this ship is kind of interesting. I think that overall its best role is in suppressing and destroying lots of the lighter ships, especially if you're against, say, tech. You can definitely use that Nano culling ability, as well as the recursive regeneration to get the ship right into the enemy fleet there. You can use your guns to just very quickly snipe down all of their point defense ships. And once those Gardas are gone, you could have your Kanrak Assailants destroy all their heavier ships. And if they're trying to chase down your Kanrak Assailants with even like Harka heavy cruisers, Nano culling and your guns are very good against Harka heavy cruisers as well. You don't have quite the Pierce to like easily kill Harkas, but you're still throwing out enough damage in general to kill them pretty quickly. Combine that with your other abilities, I think that this is pretty good at destroying those sorts of targets there. And Kanrak Assailants are also pretty good against Harka heavy cruisers in terms of like cost-effective trades as well. Although probably not anymore. They really buffed the Harka and they really nerfed the Kanrak Assailant. So the reason that you would go for that combination is that you assume that this thing is capable of quickly and efficiently killing all of the lighter ships, even if they're coming at you in very, very large numbers. While you focus the rest of your fleet on stuff that's capable of cracking through capital ships very effectively. So I think that that's sort of the way that you look at this thing, because this thing can kill like an entire army of frigates all by itself. If you've got just a massive fleet that's just all disciples, this thing can kill them pretty effectively. So let's take a look at different build options. I think that you are going to want to get all three of these, and since you get 2 ticks of Subversion Grid, I don't think that you think of it in terms of like which abilities do you cap necessarily. I think it's a case of like looking at this as a which abilities do I prioritize and get more levels of. But so if we're going for a nano culling heavy build, this is one of the moments where like we look at the Vasari roster of items and really feel disappointed, because this is one of those situations where you've got 6 item slots, you've got lots of potential, and there's just nothing to fill in that sort of demand here. But if you're right in the middle of the enemy fleet there, beam modulators and wave modulators, both of them up your damage per second by a respectable enough amount. Yeah, you're only doing like about a third of your damage in beams, but those are your anti-capital damage points, and 60 is still better than your other capital ships in terms of the damage per second output. You're not focusing it either, which also sucks, but it's still a pretty good amount of damage, and being able to boost that does help a decent amount there. So I think that having that is okay, but it's definitely a little bit more discretionary. I think it's a little bit more optional. The wave modulator, on the other hand, I think is very, very good for the ship. I think that the ship is one of the only ships in the game that can really make use of this, unfortunately. But here it is. This is the ship that you take this for. For defense, you're probably going to want the phase attenuated shield and the self-repairing armor, and you could potentially go into strikecraft armor as an option. This does get eventually 8 strikecraft groups, and that is enough to justify taking a strikecraft armor, especially if you don't have anything better to spend it on. However, I don't think it's really necessary for this craft, and I do think that the self-repairing armor and phase attenuated shield are closer to being necessary. The only reason that I don't think that you're necessarily always going to do this is because I personally don't think that phase attenuated shield is very good, but self-repairing armor is absolutely necessary. For utility, this is a ship that you can throw some utility on there. We're looking at a situation where we've got not a lot of offense or defense options that we really just have to take there. You could throw in something like a Mobile Xeno Embassy. You could throw in something like Phasic Comms Net Restoration. The Phasic Comms Net Restoration is actually ridiculously strong for this particular ship there, so it's definitely an option. I think that the Gravity Stabilizer is actually really strong for the ship. It gives you that ability to fly into the best position possible to use that Nano culling, which does leave you very open to enemy attack if you're using that. So Gravity Stabilizer does let you get into those situations better and lets you get out of those situations better as well. The Resonance Amplifier, I think, works well for the ship. Unlike a lot of other Visari capital ships, I don't think that you necessarily need to have a utility tree. You actually benefit tremendously from combat with this ship just because of how much gun you've got. But any build that you go, the Resonance Amplifier is going to have a little bit of something for this particular ship there. I do think in this case, though, that I'd be kind of happy having just the combat tree for extra damage there. The closest to having a mandatory thing for utility is Subversion Grid, but since you're allowed 3 of these ships, you can have 2 Subversion Grids, and if you've got access to 2 Subversion Grids, you've got the ability to have 100% uptime with that based on the cooldown, so you don't need to have 2 of them. Or you don't need to have the ability to cast this every 90 seconds. Just being able to cast it once every 2 minutes means that you can alternate between the 2. So I think that resonance amplifiers are not super important for this thing, but there are some builds where you may want to take it. I don't think you really need the antimatter recharger for this guy. It does become more expensive to use its abilities, but since you can't level both of them like to 5 or anything like that, you're not really that choked for antimatter. Especially because one of them is going to be a little bit slower to cast and a little bit cheaper on antimatter compared to the other one. I think that that's another reason to get the recursive regeneration. So you end up in a situation where I don't think that you really need the antimatter recharger that badly. You could definitely get the phase gate restoration. I think that that's actually really strong in this guy. Makes it so you can sort of phase gate in a bunch of your friendly units so that you can sort of position these guys in a couple different spots there. And have your fleets ready to arrive at a moment's notice to any of the defensive points that you have appointed. Or you can sort of have each of them prod into an enemy system. And whichever one seems like it would be the best to attack, you just sort of leap in through the phase gate with like your entire fleet there as a sort of surprise attack there. I think that overall, you're looking at the same build though, no matter which of these you go for first, because there's such few items that you really are selecting for in the Visari ships here. It's a little bit unfortunate. I do think that it's deliberate that Visari's got weaker items than Tech or Advent, but yeah, it really shows and it really hurts when you're looking at the command ships here. I didn't really talk about the warfare research here. Second generation cruise isn't going to get you very much because you don't start off with an additional level, and you can't get to level 3 with third generation cruise. You only end up at level 2 with this. However, those extra experience points do go a long way to making it so that you can get to level 3 a little bit faster. And because you're spreading out your abilities, and because your abilities start off at quite a high strength value and don't scale super fast, I think that actually just having third generation crews to have 2 abilities, in particular Nano culling and recursive regeneration, as a pairing out of the gate is actually really, really good. I think that that's typically going to be one of the more important ones. For weapon upgrades, you do care about this for your PD, which does help against like strikecraft quite a bit, as well as against bombs and stuff like that. But it's mostly waves. You're really looking to get that huge bonus there. The wave overdrive also comes from that tree. You technically do have beams. Those are going to also benefit a little bit from these guys. And again, the item here is going to be nice for that. Missiles only apply to your carrier bombers, so you're not going to really care about this too much. in particular there. So especially not the phase mills predictors. I don't think that that's important for the ship at all. Your turret servos actually do matter a lot for this. You got a lot of point defense guns. They're actually quite strong, and they're positioned all over the place. So you're capable of intercepting a wide variety of enemy strike craft or missiles from a lot of different angles. Precise turret servos really does help with that, especially the range increase. The heavy turret servos also is really, really strong on this one because you've got those guns positioned all around your ship. This one really makes a big difference for that. That tracking speed lets you fire at like different corvettes that are sort of buzzing around you way more effectively. The extra range also helps a little bit in that particular case there. For durability for this type of ship, obviously you care about like getting all of them, but I think that for this one, the hull regeneration effects are probably the strongest, just because you've got such a humongous amount of hull pool. But there's no like specific health type that really benefits this disproportionately compared to others. I think that this is one of those ships though that if you do back it up with like a Scarantra, you could definitely get some utility out of that armor there. Shields is probably the least important for Visari just across the board, but I think that this ship actually makes pretty good use of it because its shield numbers are actually pretty good, even if they're not really that impressive. For Empire research, I do think that you do want to get the reactors upgrades here, just because like as you sort of advance into the game, your abilities become more and more and more expensive and less mana efficient. So the antimatter drain becomes more intensive as you go along. Getting access to these can help you sort of like keep up a little bit better there, and helps negate a little bit if your opponent's got something like a Radiance or a Dunov. I don't think that this ship really needs the antimatter recharger. It's not really that antimatter inefficient, and it has a really deep antimatter pool. So I don't think that this is really necessary. If you just get these upgrades instead, I think that'd be a little bit better. Like I mentioned, phase resonance is a little bit iffy with this thing. I think that's good, but it doesn't need this research like super, super hard. I think there's a couple builds where you could say that you really, really want to have that phase resonance active for longer, but for the most part, I think the ship does sort of fine without that. So anyway, that's going to be our look at the Sularkan Tyrant. A lot of this is hypothetical, looking at the statistics and the way the guns are and all of its other stuff there, but I really do think that this thing is more designed for killing like sort of medium cruisers, light cruisers, or frigates, or corvettes even. And I think it's extremely, extremely good at that, leaving you open to use the rest of your fleet to deal with capital ships or heavier ships. Even to a certain extent, I would leave the rest of your fleet to deal with heavier cruisers, the 400 durability ones. But being able to sort of like focus three of these guys on just killing all your light ships, and then having the rest of your fleet built for sniping capitals, that leaves you with a lot of potential to destroy enemy capitals very efficiently, because that's not that much invested population in just the Sularkan Tyrants there. That's 300 population on just those three, leaving you with a lot of extra supply for the rest of your fleet. So in any event, though, that's going to be our video for today. I hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.